I absolutely love SpongeBob SquarePants. It's definitely one of the greatest cartoons of all time, especially in the early seasons with its witty humor and cast of fun and diverse characters. However, after the events that took place one unholy day, I'll never look at that yellow anthropomorphic sponge ever again the same way. It all started in 2008 when I was a youngin'. One of my neighbors was having a yard sale, and I was rummaging around it trying to find anything I could buy with the $10 my mother had given me. She was on welfare. But it was okay. We had DVDs. I eventually came across some old DVDs, all of them marked with names of cartoons. Amongst the many DVDs, there was actually a VHS tape that had the title Squidward Grew Lungs on it. Well, that was unusual. It left me feeling frizzled and unkempt. I presented it to my neighbor and asked him what it was. He chuckled for a little bit and said that a child like me wouldn't want to watch something grown up like that. I was always nervous around him, but I really enjoyed going to his yard sales as he always had good stuff. So I insisted he tell me more. He laughed and explained it was a very special episode of SpongeBob SquarePants and said I could take it for free. But he also told me that I could only watch it by myself. Hmm, scary older man telling a kid they could only do something by themselves without telling other people. Eh, nothing suspicious here. I was happy to have a new episode of my favorite program. I went into my room and turned on my small box television and popped the VHS tape in. I forgot to get popcorn. That was my first mistake. The episode started pretty normally, though there were a few audio glitches and cuts during the intro, but I assumed it was just because it was an old VHS tape. The title card came on and it showed Squidward grew lungs in big red letters with a white paper background. There was no music, and the episode started with the usual bubble transition. At this point, I just figured the episode was an unfinished draft, which admittedly piqued my interest even at a young age. I loved knowing the process of animation. The episode began with Squidward tentacles at the Krusty Krab restaurant. There weren't any customers, and it was clear that he did not want to be there, yet for some reason he didn't quit. He looks in the kitchen and noticed that SpongeBob wasn't there, so he went to Mr. Krabs' office, and lo and behold, he wasn't there either. Squidward pondered what was going on and decided to head off into town. Lo and behold, no one was there either. He started to worry, but figured solitude was something he could actually enjoy for once without SpongeBob and Patrick around. He looks at an art museum, plays the clarinet uninterrupted, and even relaxes in his own front lawn. However, he suddenly starts panicking and desperately searches for anyone, anything that is still with him. After a brief montage of him manically searching, he actually ends up in the middle of Bikini Bottom. Squidward then falls to his knees and he begins to cry. Suddenly, he hears SpongeBob's voice say,
"Don't worry. Look up, Squidward."
Squidward looks to the sky and sees SpongeBob and every other character above the water, breathing air and looking like their 3D selves. However, they seem a bit more human-like. Anthropomorphic indeed. This sort of creeped me out, but I ignored it and I continued watching. SpongeBob then said,
"We've evolved, Squidward. We can live on land. You just have to evolve too."
Squidward is confused by this and yells at SpongeBob how he's supposed to evolve. SpongeBob then smiles really wide, as do the rest of the Bikini Bottomites, and he whispers,
"Bro."
Squidward then starts screaming and holding his chest, and not in a cartoonish, funny way. He sounds like a real person in agony. His chest starts pumping violently. It shows an X-ray view, showing lungs growing inside of him. After convulsing for a small bit, the camera shows a close-up of his closed eyes. When his eyes open, they're bloodshot. The camera zooms out and shows Squidward floating in the middle of the ocean. He looks more human-like the rest of the characters, but more deformed and less complete. His skin has a realistic leathery detail to it, and his arms have extended while his tentacles grew human joints. He then suddenly holds his chest as bubbles start pouring out of his mouth. He's drowning. As water fills his new lungs and his eyes are nearly popping out of his skull, blood drips from his tear ducts and his nose. The music cuts out again, and all we hear is the sounds of Squidward struggling. He starts desperately trying to claw for the surface, trying to breathe air like the rest of his kin, but to no avail. His veins are appearing on his body as he starts becoming fully deprived of oxygen. He slowly stops struggling as his pupils fade and he finally drowns. As the background fades to black, with the only thing on screen being his corpse. Well, after watching that horrific display, I paused the tape and I cried. Who would make such a demented cartoon? Why was it in my neighbor's garage? I didn't want to continue after that. My stomach hurt and I felt like I was going to vomit. I turned off my TV and I ejected the VHS tape and put it in my top drawer. I laid down and just stared at the ceiling, processing what I just witnessed before eventually falling asleep. My dreams were haunted by visions of Squidward's bloodshot, faded eyes and his sickening choking and screams. I felt his pain through myself, and I suddenly started gasping for air too. I felt my lungs filling with water, that excruciating burning sensation in my chest. As my vision started to fade, I was jolted awake by TV static. I could have sworn I turned the TV off before I took a nap. I then looked at my clock and saw it was a little past midnight. The streetlights outside illuminated my room in a subtle yet eerie orange glow. I sat up and took the VHS tape out of my drawer. I stared at the title of it, contemplating if I should continue watching it. Eventually, through my fear, I worked up enough courage to put it back into the player. The video then plays back where it left off, with Squidward's corpse just floating in the middle of a black void. Nothing is happening. Just that disturbing visual of his corpse with a low and dreary droning sound playing. After waiting for a minute, I start to fast forward, my morbid curiosity taking over me. I notice Squidward's corpse isn't just a still image. It's moving slowly, subtly bobbing and down with the currents of the ocean. I turn up the speed and see that small chunks of his body are slowly disappearing. No, it was decomposing. I watched as his corpse bloated slowly before disgustingly discharging a pitch black substance. The black substance eventually completely hid his body, leaving me in complete darkness. A sentence in red text appeared at the top of the screen that said, "Not every creature can evolve." Suddenly, the video cuts and the text February 8th, 2007 appears. The video cuts again and shows very grainy footage of a white room with a small wooden table in the middle of it. On top of the table is a plastic container filled to the brim with water and an octopus sitting inside. Suddenly, a voice comes on. It texts the speech voice and says, "Evolve." The video then jumps to a close-up of the octopus having its legs ripped off slowly by a pair of gloved hands. I could see the octopus struggling to get away to no avail, as one by one its legs were pulled off its body. Though it couldn't scream, I could tell it was in agony. The video jumps again, this time to a close-up of wrinkled old mouth. He then starts slowly putting all the octopus legs in his mouth, all of them still wriggling around. He then starts chewing them, keeping his mouth open as he does so you could see every chunk be ground down to mush. I felt really nauseous watching this, but I just couldn't look away. The video jumps once more, showing the octopus sitting there with no legs, as the man grabs a scalpel and then brutally stabs it in each eye, pulling each out of the sockets, and shows a close-up to the camera, squishing them in his hands. He then walked back over to the octopus, which wasn't even moving anymore, and started petting its head. Then suddenly the man began laughing and proceeded to repeatedly stab the octopus in its head over and over and over. I eventually had to look away. I just kept hearing the sound of the knife entering its flesh. After the noise had stopped, I nervously removed my hands from my eyes and saw the aftermath. Couldn't even recognize the mass of flesh and chunks on the table as an octopus. The man's shirt was completely covered in the viscera of the dead octopus, and breathing heavily, he began chuckling to himself. The video jumps one last time to a close-up of the octopus's remains on a plate. The text-to-speech comes back saying the words, "You won't evolve," on loop for nearly a full minute, before suddenly ending with a sudden and horrifying close-up of Squidward's agonizing face, screaming in sheer and utter terror.